Welcome to the Long Lost Shows Show, a new TV series based on the popular website lostshows.com. Now, over the years, you've probably sat at home and watched a lot of television. But did you ever stop to think why some things get seen again and again, whilst others just never seem to be repeated? Are you aware that classic series like Doctor Who and Dad's Army are actually missing episodes? Incredible it is now to consider, but as recently as 30 years ago, so much TV was just thrown away. Well, over the next few weeks, this show will explore TV's forgotten heritage and try to find some of those long-lost gems. Now, I must say, if you think you've got a piece of missing television, then contact the station on lost@bigcentre.tv. That's lost@bigcentre.tv. Or check it out at www.lostshows.com. Now, my first guest is Roger Am, who worked on a breakthrough quiz show back in the day called Telly Addicts. Welcome to the show. Tell us what Telly Addicts was.
Telly Addicts was a big BBC network show hosted by Noel Edmonds. It had originally wasn't called Telly Addicts. If my memory serves me correct, it was originally a show which was done in London called Telly Quiz. And it had gone out, but I don't think it had quite worked. So it had come to Pebble Mill. I think the development team had worked on it, tweaked it a little bit. I think they made it a bit simpler, and then obviously put in Noel Edmonds, who was a huge star, and then tweaked it, and the rest, as I say, is history, because it was a massive show for the network, and of course for BBC Pebble Mill it was a huge show. And basically the show, quite simply, was two families, and it was often families, who sat in a studio with, and it was two sofas, not a million miles from what we're doing here. And basically it was families who loved watching television, so it was normally mom, dad, and brother, sister, and they sat down and they answered questions on classic and present television, and they battled it out week by week, and then when one family won, they moved to the next round, and ultimately the family that answered the most questions and the most programme were crowned Telly Addicts.
Can we have a little look at it?
Yeah, of course, let's have a look.
And look, they're on their hobby horses. Andy's big one and Teddy's little white one. Don't you ever fall off, Teddy? Oh, you do.
There's a lot of parents in here who should know better than to laugh at that sort of thing. Now, come on, please. Your first question. In which series was Andy Pandy broadcast?
What's the matter?
So, celebrity versions as well?
Yes, that's right. I remember we had a Christmas version, and that was a celebrity version where we had celebrities come and play the game, which is great fun as well, and worked really well. But primarily ordinary families who loved TV and watching old classic clips.
So where did you source the material from?
Well, most of it was sourced. Originally, the research was done by me looking at old copies of the Radio Times, actually.
Really?
Yeah, I used to go upstairs.
Was it just BBC programmes?
No, it was ITV as well.
Yeah.
We had some from ITV and some from abroad as well, but primarily BBC, because Windmill Row, which is BBC's main library, had a fantastic array of old archive material, so we used to use a lot of that, but we did buy in quite a bit from ITV as well. And basically, because I was a researcher on it, which meant that I basically had to come up with potentially what to view. So I'd be looking through these fantastic, Radio Times, and they were bound actually, so I used to look through the old copies and then make notes as to what potentially could be interesting viewing, then write it all down, and then basically order it up from Windmill Road. And I think other archive, which was things like Saint or Randall and Hopkirk, which were obviously from ITV, we ordered in.
Were they on sort of different formats as well? Because down the years, the way of recording material changed.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when once I'd done the research and decided that I wanted, say, 10, 20 copies of different programmes, I then had to order it through the BBC Library in Birmingham. And most of it used to come on what they call 2-inch, which I think we've got here.
Yeah,
I mean, actually, it'll take two of us to lift this up. There you go.
Wow.
So this was
really heavy.
This was what was the 2-inch. So if you can imagine, I don't know, if I had say 20 of those.
Right. So the videotape is inside.
Yes, it was inside. Yes,
Yeah.
and it's on a spool,
Right.
and then I would potentially order like 20 at a time.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine I'd order it on a Wednesday, and it would come on a Thursday, on a Friday, and then I would be viewing it all weekend. But the thing is, it used to come on like a mini forklift because they were so heavy and so vast. So I used to get the call in, and the librarian used to say, "Oh, come down, come and check off your list and make sure that you've got everything that you ordered." And she always used to say to me, "Make sure you don't lose any because that's the only copies we've got."
Pressure was
yeah,
on.
absolutely. But yeah, I mean, and then I'd have to go into the VT suites and make the booking for that, and then we played them on that. And
it was quite a palaver, wasn't it? So, pretty labour intensive.
Yes,
well,
it was
booking
absolutely
suites and
labour
all the rest of
intensive.
it.
Nowadays it's quite simple, isn't it? Because you just put this in.
I know. Bonkers, isn't it?
Yeah, look
somewhere
at
in between.
Yeah, and something in between that.
whatever.
But in them days, we had the 2-inch. Then we had the 1-inch as well, which was a slightly smaller version. And of course, we had these fellas as well. So it was, and of course, film was done through Telecine, and that was put through the spools and all that. And I can remember, the engineer having to clean it up and everything. And I'd sit there and it'd either break or whatever, and then have to put tape on and say. It really was a bit of a palaver. Fantastic.
All these clips that you watched, all these different programmes, did you get the impression that the golden age of TV has passed?
No, I don't think I ever got that. At the time, I didn't know that the golden age of television was going to be around as long as it is now, actually.
Yes.
They're saying nostalgia is a thing of the past. It's not. It's very much a thing of the future.
Yeah.
You just have to look at all the TV listings now to understand and to know that schedulers and commissioners know that old classic archive material is what people want. Currently I could name you half a dozen shows on television which are still doing the rounds. Dad's Army is still on BBC Two.
I know. Still getting the audiences, isn't
absolutely, and on top of that, the satellite has got 2 channels which are completely dedicated to old classic TV. So, no, at the time I didn't know, because often you think, oh, well, it's kind of here and it'll stay here. But no, it just seems to have got more and more and more popular.
You must have had square eyes doing that programme. Do you have a favourite edition?
Well, I must have watched hundreds and hundreds of hours of. And I was much younger then, so a lot of the programmes I actually didn't know.
Yeah.
But I think I'd always been a very big fan of The Saint.
Yes.
Roger Moore's Saint. And I remember watching the pilot of Simon Templar, which was fantastic. And I managed to get a VHS of it. So I've got that somewhere in the archives, but I think that was probably my favourite. I really loved watching it. Yeah, it was black and white.
Yeah.
And I think on my VHS that I've still got somewhere, it was The Saint, William Tell, and
Robin Hood.
Yes,
the old
of course.
ITC programme.
And I think Randall and Hopkirk Deceased was the other one.
That's right.
Fabulous,
They did amazing shows in those Lou Grade days, didn't they?
Yeah.
Someone who was very closely associated with Lou Grade and ATV was Bob Monkhouse, and I know that another avid collector, but you worked with him, didn't you?
Yeah, I was very, very lucky. I worked on a show called Bob's Your Uncle, which was produced by Central's Entertainment. That was another very big ITV network show. And I was the researcher on that, and I used to write a lot of Bob's questions and do a lot of his quizzes. Actually, before I got the job, I went to see Bob Monkhouse at the King's in Great Bar. I went to see his stand-up show.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't know at the time that I'd ever get the pleasure of working with him, but he was fabulous. Such a clever man.
Yes.
Very witty, very sharp, and very clean.
Yeah, was it a different kind of offering in real life, as it were, to on the telly?
Yeah, absolutely. He was probably sharper, I think, on telly than he was when I saw him. He just was so clever, and he had this enormous capacity to remember facts. I always used to remember. We used to sit. I was only a young man at that time, sort of making my way into television, and sitting in a production office when we used to have the meetings, and there'd be Bob Monkhouse and John Junkin and Colin Edmonds, who's still around, and I think there was 2 or 3 writers from the 2 Ronnies there, and of course I was in the corner, and I used to do all these questions, and I used to sit there and often used to think to myself, God, what am I doing here? You know, I've literally got an icon here, and you know, lots of important people here, and I used to do all these questions, and I always remember he always used to say to me, give me as much information as you can, because I'll always use it. And I often thought, because I used to do questions previously for other presenters, and often you'd give them the information, but they never used it. But Bob Monkhouse genuinely did.
He could always find a connection to things, couldn't he?
Yeah.
And the wonderful thing is that some of the things he had in his collection, nobody else had.
Absolutely.
And the wonderful TV preservation group, Kaleidoscope, has that library. And found some amazing hidden gems there.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was lucky enough when we had these meetings, I actually saw Bob's books. So when he was sitting there, you know, there's these famous books that, you know, you could see all the A, B, C, D, and of course he was a fantastic doodler artist as well. So I managed to see that. But I mean, yeah, I mean, he was just you know, the word legend, I suppose, sometimes is used too frequently, but it was a real pleasure to work with him. And he was smart enough to know that if you gave him information, he'd use it, and obviously, you know, made him look. It was a real pleasure. I really enjoyed working with him.
Yeah, what a star. Going right back to Mad Movies, right through Celebrity Squares.
Yeah, absolutely.
He even did the early Family Fortunes, all of these different
That's right,
things,
and he was also one of the very first people to star in the Carry On movies as well.
Yes, he was, wasn't he?
Yes.
Was it Dentist?
Or something, I mean, he had a fabulous career. I mean, it was a real pleasure to work with him.
Another TV show you worked on to do with old clips was with yet another Bob, someone who's very much rooted here in the Midlands.
Yes, that was with Bob Warman, Bob Central fame, and it was a show called Back to the Present. And that was a really lovely show, and basically the idea of that was that we got all of Central's news footage, archive material, of which there is loads. Being an ex-Central man, you'll know that. And there's all of this lovely archive footage that we have. And then basically it was a fantastic opportunity to set questions and to do a quiz show based around the region's archive. And of course, the Central region was the biggest region that ITV had. So we had the East Midlands, which was Nottingham and Derby and Leicester. Then of course we had the West Midlands, and of course we had bits of
the South.
Of the South. So it was fantastic, and once again it gave me an opportunity to sit there and watch this fantastic archive with some fantastic old presenters. And that was similar as well. We had people who sat in studio and who loved watching old clips as well, and that was another piece of
when you think about it, going back to Telly Addicts, in a way that was kind of the start of the resurgence of an interest in archive TV. You're kind of responsible in a way.
Well, I mean, it was just a pleasure to work. I mean, you know, as I mentioned before, you know, nostalgia, people love watching classic clips. Now, why often people say, well, what is it about classic television, archive television? Well, the thing is, I think most people, when they watch classic TV, they can often identify where they were with it. Yeah. It's a thing that, you know, when you put something on the telly and you watch it, maybe it's the Two Ronnies or Dow Boy or whatever it is, you can often there's something in the head that says, oh, I can remember where I was at that time. So it's often that connection that people have, and it's often to do with family as well. Right. And I think classic TV does that to you. I mean, I can always remember in our household, the family were avid fans of Dallas. So when Dallas came on, or whatever it was, 8 o'clock on a Wednesday, we all sat round the television and watched Who Shot JR. And that still is quite vivid for me, because I always remember it as a time when the family all sat and watched together. And I think that's what classic TV does.
Tell us one thing about having fewer channels as well, of course. You know, back in the day, you know, 1, 2, 3, and then later on Channel 4, but that was kind of it, really, wasn't it?
That's right. I mean, in them days, you just sat and watched whatever. I still remember watching the Palladium and stuff like that, and stuff like Star Soccer, you know, the big sports fan. But I think that's what archive classic TV does. It's a bit more than just watching your favourite stars, past and present. I think it's something to do with that familiarity with family and the bringing together, and I think that's what classic TV, and as I said before, you just have to look into the TV schedules
Yeah, I love doing that.
Oh.
I love looking at old back numbers of that, but I think that's probably another programme.
Of course, of course.
It's brilliant to talk to you.
Well, thank you very
and
much.
Thank you for Telly Addicts and all the work that you've done, because it's been absolutely great.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Really nice to have you here. The show, however, is not over. We have plenty more to come in part 2 of the Lost Shows show. We're going to have a big debate about television, the good, the bad, the ugly, with some people who really know their television. It may get a bit heated. So stay with us for that right after this break. Don't go on. Well, hello again, welcome back. Now, every week in part 2 of the Long Lost Shows show, we're joined by some TV experts who debate an issue. And here they are. Today, we're joined by Robert McLaughlin, who's an academic at Birmingham City University. We have Richard Clark, who's a TV historian, and David Hughes, entertainer, we like to call him. We'll find out more about David in a minute. OK, I'm going to toss something into the ring first of all then for our debate. It's all very well talking about fantastic archive television and old programmes. We have fond memories. But when you actually look back at some of this stuff, it kind of doesn't stand up to the memories, does it? Is it worth keeping this stuff?
Well, I think that some of it is purely from a historical perspective, from looking at how life used to be at that time. It could be beneficial for some of it to be repeated now, so as people who weren't around at that time can see how different things were, whether it's something that was seemed as funny at the time but isn't so funny now would be irrelevant in that respect, because what you would be seeing is part of how people used to live in the past and how people used to handle situations and things.
Sometimes things are funny now for the wrong reasons, aren't they, really,
Yeah.
in terms of change? I mean, you've done some academic studies into this, haven't you? Really?
Yeah, we were looking at the fact that a lot of TV that we get now has been kind of changed and adapted to what we watch and see. We were talking before about the fact that no one seems to smoke on TV anymore, and the fact that also we have a lot of content that's adjusted to how we live. So the X factors, this idea of clips, very quick things, very sort of put together very, very fast. This idea that you have a lot of people kind of going back and recalling stuff and having clips and montages and things. It's how we have TV now. We have very, very quick, very, very short TV. You go back 20 or 30 years, you have a completely different way of looking at things. You have a different perspective. You have a longer TV shows. You have things that maybe have a slightly more attention span for things. We're discussing Doctor Who, saying that Doctor Who now is one episode, that's it. 6 or 7 episodes going back a long, long time. The idea that you could have an hour and a half, 2 hours worth of show across weeks with cliffhangers.
That's right.
And you have something that that's it for this week. See you next week.
It's
Now
like the
we
old
want more
serials
content
from the cinema,
That's
isn't
it?
it?
Yeah.
You know, from, I guess that was where that was coming
Yeah.
from.
So we changed our way of looking at things.
Yeah, we say it's a culture thing as well with the you're on about the comedy things, or any TV from that period. He's asking if it's worth keeping. It shows culture. So it's a reference, it's a historical reference to culture of how life used to be. So be it music, be it plays, anything. It's a historical reference. And in fact, I've always said film is a time machine.
It's true, isn't it?
You know, you can't physically go back through time, but film is a time machine. It's all there.
I think a lot of it was junked at the time because nobody realised the historical significance of it. They also didn't realise that the commercial potential of it as well, through DVDs and things like that, because none of that was available at the time. But the historical side to it is what really should matter more than that.
And is that why we get excited then when we find a missing episode
Yeah.
of Doctor Who or whatever it might be?
Well, Doctor Who's a good case in point because there are, I think it's about 96 missing episodes of Doctor Who, which is quite a lot. I mean, I was saying to these guys earlier on, the main one that everybody wants, who's a Doctor Who fan, and I include myself in that, is that 4th episode of The 10th Planet with William Hartnell's regeneration into Patrick Troughton. And there's been, you know, searches have took place in Norway and countries across the world to try and find it, where it was sent to, where it was originally broadcast, and nothing has come up, right? So there are certain programmes that are more of a holy grail than others to be found. I mean, what disappoints me is that with regards to certain shows, there are a lot of shows that people wouldn't realise have got missing episodes. Crossroads has, I think it's about 1,500 missing episodes. Top of the Pops has several thousand missing episodes as well. And the Top of the Pops in particular, that means that some of the best performances by some of the best singers.
Sad, I know.
Yeah.
It's amazing how many bands, if you look at the ratio of the BBC, what they kept at the Top of the Pops, how many bands appeared during the year with classic singles, you know, talking the early 70s, the golden era of Top of the Pops, when he went to colour in the 70s and that. And you look at the bands that were on there doing classic appearances, and the only ones that they've got left is probably the odd one or two from the Christmas specials.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think it's a cult thing though. I think with this collection thing, I think, you know, you speak to, although I say that, sometimes people say, "Oh, did you see that? I haven't seen that before," and they're not really like got the interest we have. But I think a lot of it is a cult thing, and it's got a limit to, because we're all getting older. The people that are really into the stuff that's gone missing are getting older and less each day.
What would you most like to see on again?
What would I like to, myself personally, I'd like to see Rider White Swan T-Rex on Top of the Pops.
Great.
The first time, because we only had one TV in those days, there was no go to your bedroom, watch the TV. We had one television. For some reason, I did see a lot of classic Top of the Pops, but I didn't see that one. Never saw him perform Rider White Swan, and I'd love to see that.
I wonder, did he, because he used to have a show on Granada, Mark.
Yes, Mark
I don't know if it was
shows.
ever recreated on that, but that would have been. That's also quite odd to think, isn't it? That was actually a kid show, but some like big stars, I mean, David Bowie and all these people popped up on those. 4:20 on a Friday afternoon.
You've got these guys who are being very adult, who are doing very adult performances, and also there's kind of the idea of kind of gender swapping and there's kind of quite groundbreaking things for TV at the time. Then trying to get an audience of teenagers involved with and kids TV, and it must be quite hard to think, tone it down, bring it to TV, or vice versa. And I think it's quite interesting to sort of see these kind of pop stars at the time, which are still hugely prevalent now, being on at a TV show for children, saying, what's your favourite type of crisps and things like, obscure kid questions and things. And you think these are rock stars that were kind of having to sort of work with an audience that wasn't quite as responsive as they should be, really, in some ways.
As an academic at the university there, you probably come into contact with people who are a little bit younger than we are now. Do you think they have the same sense of shared culture watching certain programmes like we did when there were fewer channels?
I think in some ways we've got a generation that doesn't really watch TV as much as we did. I think I span the gap in some ways. I'm showing my age a bit there, unfortunately, that I can remember 4 channels. I remember 3 channels, 4th and 5, and then the prevalation of Sky. The guys who and the young ladies who are students now are YouTube. They clip very quickly. They move from one thing to the next. They don't have a focus and attention that we have, but they can find things that we would spend years trying to find. I really want to find that film.
That spoils it.
It does. We
I've
lose
been told
the.
that YouTube has spoilt the whole search and find thing. I don't know how you feel being a Doctor Who fan. Do you feel it spoils it? I do.
I think, to be truthful, what tends to happen with YouTube is that people are more likely to try and find just clips rather than full episodes, and it's took that side of it out of it, right? I think it has spoilt it to some extent, because it's kind of lessened the enthusiasm.
A bit like people nowadays when they listen to music.
Yeah.
They don't download it. They don't have a whole album anymore. They just download one song.
It ruins the pub quiz as well. It's exactly the same thing, that you can find anything instantaneously. If you don't know the thing, it's true. Straight onto your phone. And I think that's kind of how we live. We live on our mobile devices. And
that's right. Times move on.
That's it.
Times change, and it's the way of the world, I suppose, isn't it? I want to touch on opportunity knocks and new faces, because I know, revealing here, that you auditioned for those shows. Again, not many of those exist now. In fact, indeed, for Lenny Henry, his first appearance, I mean, Kaleidoscope was able to find that, I think through Bob Monkhouse, if I remember rightly, and made the presentation to him. But not much of that. What was it like going to audition on those shows?
I was a lot younger, and it was quite, as I said, it was quite terrifying actually, because the venue they would hold it wouldn't be like in a small room with just, I think they tend to invite people into like a small room these days where they have a couple of people sat there. I was actually on a stage at a well-known venue in Bristol, the Hippodrome, and it was quite frightening because there was a lot of bands there. I was a solo artist, and there was a lot of bands there with amplifiers, equipment. There's me with like Donovan with an acoustic guitar, so it was quite scary. As I say, I was so nervous at the one audition that they thought I was an Elvis impersonator because my leg was going. And Elvis had just died, and I went. It was about 2 or 3 days after Elvis died, and my legs were just going like crazy. And they thought this is, some amateur Elvis impersonator.
Dear, oh dear. But I mean, these shows were the X Factor and Britain's Got Talent of their day. When you see what they do now, we have come a long way. I mean, for the people auditioning, standing in front of the crowds and all the rest of it.
Did you have a sob story? Did you have some sort of story to tell?
No, there was none of that.
Did they look at your journey in any way?
And the build and all the family stood behind you. There was none of that in those days. I just went on my own. In fact, most people were. There was clowns, comedians, bands, but there was nobody with them. These people, they went.
Did you disapprove of that?
Well, I was just thinking, have we really come a long way? Because a lot of these shows now seem to be just making money out of people's misery. Whereas in them days, they would tell you whether you were any good or whether you were bad, but they would seem to be a bit more polite about it. There was...
Mickey Mouse.
Mickey Mouse was a bit of a different case.
Who was the other guy who was a songwriter? Tony Hatch. Tony Hatch and Mickey Mouse could be quite cruel.
Yeah, but hey, so maybe Simon Garrett took something from them.
They could be, but there was a whole different atmosphere to it.
Different world.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much for talking to us tonight. Robert, David and Richard, for your insight into the great TV debate, and hope we'll see you again before too long. Right, that's just about it for part 2, and we will be back in part 3, of course, with local writer William Gallagher, and he'll be talking sci-fi with me. Don't go away. Hello again, welcome back to the Long Lost Shows show. Good to have your company. Well, my next guest this evening is William Gallagher from Birmingham, a man who's well known for his work looking back at the past. And, well, let's start with your work with the Radio Times, which to me, well, what you did sounds fascinating. Tell everyone else.
Oh, I loved it. When I got that job, it was a dream come true for a drama fan. I wrote on their website, wrote the magazine, lots of features, and eventually I got a column on this day. It was called On This Day, and it ran daily in the weekly magazine, but really it was on this day in television history as seen by the Radio Times. So I would spend hours and hours in the archives for it. It's just turning those pages, reading those features. I didn't have very long to do it, but I always spent far longer than I did because you got so lost in that great archive.
There's nothing like looking at old copies of these things, is there?
And the things that come back.
Yeah.
I was particularly looking for 1976, the Glittering Prizes, famous drama series. I was supposed to write about that. And as I turned the page of that issue, a child show called Kizzy started the same day. And instantly I was back in school watching that show. So I didn't write about the Glittering Prizes, I wrote about Kizzy instead.
I guess you discovered kind of programmes that were new to you as well, looking at, from days gone by.
Yes, I mean, because I'd researched a lot of names and episode series are familiar, and there are names like David Rose produced the series, I know that, but then seeing them in situ, like on a normal Saturday night, seeing a programme listed like it was just a regular show, and that nobody knew then what a special thing it was going to be or how it was going to last. So it was just a thrill.
That's nice.
Yeah.
I know that Doctor Who is particularly close to your heart.
Yes.
Tell me a bit more about that.
I was a Doctor Who fan. When I was growing up, like
now.
Lots of people. Oh, that's what it sounded like.
It did a bit.
Well, you see, I'm a professional now.
Hey.
You see, the cold writer. I write Doctor Who radio dramas for Big Finish under licence from the BBC, and they are with the older Doctors. So I've written for Peter Davison and Colin Baker predominantly. And part of the job is trying to make it sound as if this was a story you missed, that it was on in the 70s. It must sound like it, but at the same time it has to be modern. And they're 2 hours long, 4 episodes, each feature length. So you need a modern, pacey thriller that somehow captures that Doctor Who essence. And when it works, it is just electrifying. And I'm a radio drama nut as well as television, so to have my words said. I was in studio once and Colin Baker misread a word on the script. He said but instead of yet, something like that. And I was in the studio thinking that worked. And he saw me and he stopped. And the doctor, this is my doctor when I was growing up, he stopped in the middle of studio time and said, the author is not happy. The doctor's voice, oh, I'm fine, carry on. It was better. And we actually had a debate about but versus yet. That's the level of care on it. And that's what drama does to people, performers. I mean, the clock going against us and still it mattered.
But how do you get that authentic feel? You said it needs to have that 70s sound but with a modern touch. That sounds quite tricky.
It is tricky, and I'm not 100% sure I succeed, actually, because I like thrillers. I like thrillers and rom-coms, and that's where mine tend to go. But you watch a lot of the old episodes, you saw them at the time, you remember how you felt at the time, and you get the voices back in your head. And it is nice being able to watch old television and pretend it's a job. It's good.
And the new stories then, I mean, are they like a continuation of the old ones, or do they take us off in a different direction? How does it work?
They are officially supposed to fit into the run as if they really were in the stories. So you can't contradict something that happened later. But they tend to work in little series of 3 episodes on their own.
And where can we hear them?
Oh, they're originally made for CD and for download, and then a lot go on Radio 4 Extra. Radio 4 Extra is playing a lot of Tom Baker and Paul McGann ones at the moment, and that's special. Radio 4 Extra.
Yeah.
I love that show. So,
who's your favourite Doctor?
Oh, David Tennant.
Is he? Never
written for him, but I filmed with him for a Radio Times thing. He's just instantly likeable, and I think his Doctor brought a lot of sudden gravitas. You felt the loneliness of that character. And actually I thought he made that character richer for me. And I've tried to use that in writing for Peter Davison, who I think is a superb actor, and Colin Baker. I actually thought he's far better on radio than he was on television. He has more scope and he's incredibly skillful.
Probably noticed his voice more.
Well, yes.
Strange as that sounds.
What a voice.
Tell us about Big Finish then a little bit more, because it's not just Doctor Who.
Big Finish is a huge company, and I am the tiniest part in it. I've only written Doctor Who stories for them, but they do Blake 7. Blake 7, I've just written a book about Blake 7, so it's all in my head. And in fact, I interviewed some of the cast in studio at Big Finish. So here's a famous archive show, and they're keeping it alive with new stories. They're doing incredibly well. And there are some where, as a listener, you close your eyes and you really believe surely you saw that episode in the 70s and 80s. And yet somehow, again, with that modern feel, Big Finish is a remarkable company, and I feel quite privileged, to have to step up and write to their level.
The Avengers was another one, I understand.
The Avengers, yes, the original Avengers have been written. That show actually means less to me somehow. And it's interesting how you have certain pockets of things that appeal, but when they announced they were doing the Avengers, and all of the writers who work on it, they were so giddy when they got to do that. And again, a big success.
Interesting that one, isn't it? How you maybe connect less with that, because in a way it didn't go away. I mean, there are repeats. You can see them on True Entertainment, I think, most nights now, and perhaps even some of the old ABC original studio-based editions of the Avengers were kind of conscious of them. So maybe
I think my thing is I'm just too young. I came in on the new Avengers.
Did you? Steve, Purdy and Gambit.
Exactly.
Not Emma Peel and Tara King. No. You don't know what you missed.
Okay. I should listen to some of the episodes.
I think you should. You're going to be inspired. When you look back now, and we're talking about recreating certain programs, taking them on, is there anything that you would really love to have back and that you'd really like to see again that perhaps you could develop?
Well, there are shows that throughout time I would love to have written on, and there are shows that are not getting screened anymore, studio dramas. The Oneidin Line is hardly ever shown, and probably because it's half location footage, half very obvious studio. And even in its day, it was jolting, but we accepted it. Now it throws you out of the story, and they were great stories, really well told, and they stand up once you adapt to that view. So to remount that, I mean, they've just done Poldark again. Surely the Need in Line should be revisited, and I'm available to start writing.
There you go, you heard it here. Do you think that people are really that bothered? Do you think viewers watching the programme really noticed that there's film in there and then video? Does that matter?
Well, we certainly accepted it then, and now we don't. I think it's jarring. When I wrote the book about Blake 7, my wife Angela watched the first episode with me, and she couldn't carry on. She said it was just so cheap looking. And she's right, it doesn't stand up well visually, but where it does is things that keep you going, the thriller aspect, the political stories, all of that still works. And for a lot of people, including myself, we get beyond that. But you have kind of the opposite effect now. I can't watch shows that are forced into widescreen when they're cropped wrong, and I find it terribly distracting for it. So I think not for everybody, but for a lot of people, the format and the quality it matters at least unconsciously, and it stops you watching.
Yeah. Interesting, you're talking about Need in Line and The Avengers. Peter Graham Scott, the director, worked on both of those shows.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Right.
as lots of many other things. You'll see his name coming up, but yeah, terrific. You were a Z-Cars fan, and know that that's something that you really have a burning ambition to.
Oh, I have. Yes.
I
mean, as a Doctor Who writer, of course, there are missing Doctor Who episodes, and there are loads I would like back, but the thing I would give an arm to see that's been lost is one episode of Z-Cars called A Quiet Night. It's written by Alan Plater, and it's probably the most famous Z-Cars episode, but it's also famous for officially being typical Alan Plater, in that you think nothing is happening. It's called A Quiet Night. Nothing goes on, there's no crime or anything. But it's also typical Alan in that actually enormous things are happening. The episode is long gone, there are photographs still, and I read the script. When I wrote a book about Alan, about his show The Beiderbecke Affair, I found a copy of the script. And it's got such a punch in it. There's no crime, but there is a death. And the death of this character, you really feel it. And it stays with one of the police characters forever afterwards. Nobody will be arrested, there will be no trial. He's dead and nothing will bring him back. But for a show that had nothing in it, even Alan pitched it as nothing will happen. To just do that, it's amazing on the page. Can't wait to see it. I wish I could see it on the screen.
Yeah, to a peak time audience as well.
Yes.
What, 6:45 Mondays, I think it was, wasn't it?
Yes, 1963. He told me getting hired on Z-Cars was like receiving a papal blessing, that you were a proper writer to get on that show.
And these were serious names who, well known in very often the theatrical or film world, but they did these TV shows, particularly in the 60s, that were groundbreaking because, no one had done them before, but because they were a whole change of attitude, I guess, kitchen sink drama, that kind of thing, and the single play as well.
Yes, Play for Today, of course. John Hopkins was key on Z-Cars. Actually, I mean, there was a theatrical writer. He also wrote Talking to a Stranger. It was called the first television masterpiece, and it is. You expect him in that year, in those times, with that background, to be quite a slow-paced writer. But there is a Z-Cars episode he wrote that had 90 scenes in it. And I know this because Alan told me, he'd said, right, I'm going to do one with 100. And he did. 60 minutes, 100 scenes. And around that time, the actors used to have buckets by certain scenes because they were so fast and so nervous, and it was live, they would actually throw up before getting into the next scene for it. That was pacey drama.
Yeah. And the whole thing being live, of course, is why there are so few recordings which exist now.
Yes, unfortunately. I mean, live with a lot of inserts and things, which gave him time to move between sets, but otherwise, yes, completely live. Yeah. I think it's interesting that one of the reasons we always say we've lost TV programs because it's so expensive to keep them, and it's true. But I also think it shows something of the attitude. Television came from radio, and radio came from theatre, and there was this idea that it was done once and live. The idea now of making a 1 hour primetime TV drama you expect will be shown once, maybe twice. It's just ridiculous, but that was normal then. And so this idea of it being disposable tragically was normal.
And we weren't really thinking global market then either.
No.
It was very much a domestic thing, wasn't it?
Yes.
Do you think we've lost something from that now? Do you think are today's writers less good, or is it just that they don't have an opportunity to do the kind of work that was acceptable in the 60s?
Interesting. I think there are fewer slots, things like Casualty and Holby, which are hugely popular, but they occupy a lot of the drama time available in the year. So there are fewer chances to do it, and drama is so much more expensive now that it's hard to be very experimental with it. But interesting, we must write with an international market in mind, but what seems to sell internationally is being very British. Doctor Who, of course, the Great British Bake Off sells incredibly well. Strictly Come Dancing, that's all over the world, and how British is that somehow? So there is an interesting mix between the global and the local, and finding that balance and exploiting it.
How much would that influence you as a writer, however? I mean, does that kind of spoil things for you? You're able less to perhaps write from the heart than from the market influence?
No, it completely affects how you pretend you're going to write and what you're pitching and what you say. The truth is, you have to write what you're going to write. If you're just faking it to think, I want an international cop show or something, it might be work, but there's something about drama that matters to writers and directors and producers. When they care about it, that comes through, and that's the show that is a success, particularly when it's something against the odds. When Inspector Morse started around 85, 86, there were no 2-hour dramas, and it was only done because Central wanted to fulfill a local quota. It's set in Oxford, it's within the central area, and look how that transformed everything. They took a risk, very expensive chance, transformed it. Have there been 1-hour cop shows since? I don't think so, not many.
I was in it.
Really?
I was. I had a fleeting appearance. In fact, twice. I appeared once as a TV reporter, and then the very last episode, The Remorseful Day, I popped up as a newsreader, helping to move on the plot. And that was one of my proudest moments in telly. Till they had me back in Lewis, but it's not all about me. Fantastic stuff. Do you have a burning ambition then, something that you'd really like to get your teeth into? Someone says, look, you can write whatever you like now, we'll put it on the telly or the radio.
Yes, and I'm not 100% sure I can tell you. There are two, and I am trying to get them off the ground now, and I want to see them, let alone write them. So yes, I'm working on that. But I love that you were in Lewis, because one of the things Alan Plater told me was that he never got to write for Morse. He was asked, but he wasn't available. But when Lewis came round, he wrote some of the best episodes for it, and then DL and Pasco and things. It's interesting, isn't it, how crime shows, he used to joke that he started on crime shows and ended on crime shows. There's a lot in there, and actually one of mine is a crime show. So.
Yeah. Oh, is it?
Yes.
Well, we'll keep watching the space, and then, hopefully one of these days we'll
Are you available?
Oh, well, of course I'm available. Absolutely, love to have a go at that. Why do you think that? I want to go back to Doctor Who, because we kind of got a bit waylaid. Why do you think that in particular is such a cult favourite? Because every time you talk about cult TV, it seems to me the first thing people say is, "Oh, Doctor Who."
It is special, isn't it? It reaches everybody. I go into
schools
schools
I'm not sure,
a lot.
You see, because I was always a bit scared of it as a kid.
Right.
I'm not sure we were even encouraged to watch it in our house. And sometimes I feel now that I kind of I missed out, really. So,
are you scared of it now?
That's a good question. I need to review some of the older ones. Perhaps it would come back. I should be scared of it, though, shouldn't I?
I don't know, because a couple of my Doctors are being described as horrors, and that really surprised me, because I can't cope with horror. It's a fine line between thriller and horror. I can't handle gore, and you do include monsters, so it does get a bit gory, and that is scary, but it's never been the bit that appealed to me. I think it is a genuinely good idea, and a very rare good idea, that created a very peculiar format of spreading a story out originally over several weeks for it, 4 parts and 6-parters, and being able to literally go anywhere in time and space. It just made it limitless, and maybe that shouldn't have given it the structure that it had, but somehow it made it always seem boundless and possible, although you then had the John Pertwee years where it was all confined to Earth, and actually in a way that was scarier. Rather than something being out in television. John Pertwee used to say that it's more frightening to find a Yeti on the loo in Tootingbeck than a Dalek somewhere else. And it's true. But the fact that the show could just change, and we accepted that change. It's hard to pin it down, but
it's quite clever the way they wrote around that, actually.
It really is. Whoever originally thought of that, and it was a committee of people, but that first change, William Hartnell to Patrick Troughton, I think that was genuinely genius.
Why did that happen? Do you know?
Well, officially the story is that William Hartnell wasn't terribly well, and he did seem to be having problems
Right.
getting through. So why they didn't just cancel it, I honestly don't know, but
This is one they
we would
did.
have lost out, yes. I mean, I've said that there are missing episodes that I would like. One of them is a show called Marco Polo that William Hartnell was in, but then there's a Patrick Troughton one called The Evil of the Daleks. One episode survived, so we see what it looks like. And it's oddly slow and quiet. I find the Daleks a bit odd. You know, when there's one of them, it can be scary. When there's millions of them, I kind of tune out. And this one was just sinister enough to really make me want to see what happens next.
Wow. And have you written about that one? Have you taken that one on, or is that another?
No, I've actually never written a Dalek story, and I'm not sure I could ever, you know, they don't have great dialogue, do they? Not really.
One line.
But I mean, delivered with gusto, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the other clever thing, isn't it? Let's face it, the technology wasn't really there in those days. They had to make the best of what they had. And they had the radiophonic workshop for the music and the very limited visual effects. But we're taken in by it. I guess we're just a bit more sophisticated now.
I suppose. Maybe we see too much, though. The famous first cliffhanger that really counted in Doctor Who was from the first Dalek story, and it's somebody backing away from a thing we don't see. We just see a sink plunger coming out. I don't know why a sink plunger was so scary, but the fact that it was her reaction and this thing was coming and we didn't see it, and that we had to wait a week to see what it was about.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember when I started script writing, I used to tell people that I loved you tell stories only through what people say, particularly in radio. But actually, I think it's telling stories through what people don't say, letting the audience work it out, which is terribly hard but immensely satisfying.
Yeah.
And Doctor Who is really, at its best, it's magically able to tell huge stories in tiny little ways.
Yeah, using our imaginations.
Yes.
Yeah, we like that. That's clever.
Stretching us.
Yeah.
That's what I like.
It's been absolutely brilliant to talk to you today.
Well, thank
you
you.
very much indeed, and I hope you get to make that big one.
Thank you.
We'll look out for that. Do let us know first, and come and tell us about it here.
Oh, yes.
Thank you ever so much, William.
Thank you.
Very nice to meet you. Well, there you go. That is just about it for today's show. Thank you ever so much for your company. I hope you join us again next time when we'll be raiding the archives with more special guests. And remember, if you've got a piece of lost television in your attic, email us lost@bigcentre.tv. Bye-bye.